So hey, this is Todd with Baseball Think Tank. Eli, here we are. Bottom picture is when we first started warming up. You got to a point where I said, let's go ahead and let it go. So you're throwing probably 90 feet, I would say here. But let's just watch the bottom one through a couple times. Focus on the bottom. I want you to focus on the energy um, that you see coming out of the body going into the arm as you make this throw. So just focus on the bottom one more time. Okay, now let's focus on the top. Okay, so this was after we had done some work with the core velocity belt, and see if, just naked eye, see if you notice the difference in energy. You can watch the top one through and then watch the bottom one again one more time. Okay, so right off the bat, it's, a very obvious difference in the amount of energy that you're projecting into the throw. So if we look at the bottom, one of the slides I showed the other night talked about the throwing motion being broken down into two phases, the stride phase and then the throwing phase. So we think of the stride phase as the building up of the energy, and the throwing phase being the release of the energy, or the transfer, up the kinetic chain. So we're building from the ground up, we're building energy, we're storing energy, and then we're going to let it travel sequentially through the hips, through the trunk, and then into the arm. Okay, so we see with just the stride phase here, as we're finishing our warm up, trying to put some effort into this throw, but there's the energy that's built up. Okay, so just imagine what that feels like to be in that position as compared to our stride phase here. We see, look at the amount of energy. You can start to see different muscles stretch, different muscles. So just imagine these two feelings. If your body, move to get to these positions, obviously the top, you've built up a lot more energy. There's a lot more energy that's going to go into the throwing motion, i.e. you're going to throw the ball harder, right? So overall, working with the belt, I would say that's, a huge first step. So what I would suggest is, that doesn't mean let's come out of the chute trying to, throw the ball as hard as we can. What it means is focus when you're warming up. Focus on how am I going to warm up to move my body faster, to store up more energy. Okay, so as we're going through our warm-up progressions, let's don't be just yada da da da, kind of lazy through this motion, but focus more on the lower half here. As I'm warming up, how do I load my body? How do I start moving my lower half faster? So progress through your warm-ups to start moving the lower half further and faster. Okay, so now let's really focus on this part of the delivery. And I want to show you something really interesting. I was watching your video here. Okay, so when we see, let me move it so we can see it. We get into landing. Okay, so we talked about that sequential or sequencing of rotation. So we have hips, then trunk, then shoulder rotating forward. And you said that was a concept you kind of struggled with a little bit. Well, I want you to see something really cool, and we can see it if we just focus on the little rings on the belt here. Okay, watch how you get into rotation, and then we see, look at that rotation right there. So if you're watching the rings of the belt, notice how you see this, they really rotate at the end. And here's where I picked up on that. If I'm looking at your video and said, where could we improve? Okay, I see release. Ideally, we would like to see your body more at, say, this angle. Okay, maybe that's a little steep, but we want the trunk, okay? I want that trunk a little more there. So remember we talked about the hips rotating not only around, but you can bend forward at the hips. So we're adding that rotational concept. Okay. So if our problem is we're rotating, we're finishing this rotation there. Look at that. your hips speed up at that point. So if that's the problem or the symptom, okay, we have to look to the back to find out what's causing that. So if we're going to say, okay, how do we improve to get greater hip rotation way before trunk rotation and way before arm delivery, okay, the problem is happening somewhere back here. And hopefully you'll be able to see this pretty clearly. Okay, so the first thing we see is on our initial movement. Remember, we want to be going forward. So we get all the way to the top of the leg kick and we really haven't gone anywhere. Okay, that back hip hasn't moved. Now it starts to move. Okay, so that tells us we're moving towards our target very late. Okay, so we're getting a late start. So right here, if you imagine running a race, on your mark, get set, go, you didn't go anywhere. Okay, now you go. Okay, so remember, the initial movement, our initial leg kick, that back hip wants to start. So break it down even further. What's causing or preventing us from moving forward on our initial leg kick? And I think if you focus on your back foot, you're going to see right here, see how the heel slides? Okay, so on your way up, if that back foot is slipping, that tells you your entire body weight is not on that back foot. Okay, if you're pressing your entire body weight onto that back foot, it can't slip. Okay, but as you're coming up, you're allowing, this part of your front hip, you're allowing that to do the work, as opposed to having all your weight on this back foot pressing into the ground. Okay, we want to get the force out of the ground up through the body. So let's work on our initial movement is this back foot pushing this back hip forward. As we watch this, you'll see back foot slips. On your way down, right about here is where your back foot really grabs the ground. And you can see the weight shift all the way back to your back foot. Okay, so if we watch, foot slips, and right about there, now the weight shifts back onto your back foot. And let's watch what happens to the hip from here. Okay, so once the weight finally reestablishes on that back foot, watch what happens. Boom, you start driving towards home plate. So if you can imagine, what does this feel like? Right there, when all of a sudden all that weight's back on the back foot, you are able to now drive your body forward towards the target. Okay, we want to feel that right on leg lift. So I need to figure out, what does this feel like right there when I can start driving? Think about what that feels like, driving my body forward, and then work on feeling that right there. Right there. Think about what that's gonna allow. That's going to allow us, when we get out here, if we start moving earlier, what's going to happen? My hips are going to rotate earlier. Okay, so the same timing with the hands, but now all of a sudden we're going to get this hip rotation there. We're going to get that out of the hips somewhere back here. Okay, if we get this kind of hip speed there, well before the arm or the trunk and the arm go, what do you think is going to happen? Those forces are going to multiply up the kinetic chain. The more you allow your arm to relax, the faster it's going to be able to whip through. And all of a sudden you're throwing the ball a lot harder. And it all starts with the back foot. Okay? So hopefully that helps a little bit, gives you some things to think about as you start throwing. If you're warming up, think about, how do I establish my weight on my back foot right there? Establish and drive. And you can see even on that throw, there's very little back hip drive. And again, that's where the core velocity belt, can really help you out. Okay? So hopefully that helps, and I look forward to talking with you.